and false news has become all too common. More alarming, some media outlets publish
And we are live.
All right. Live again.
Welcome, brother. We
What-
are back in the studio. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
and
What's new,
into
man?
it. Man, just hanging in there, looking for a new vehicle, trying to focus on real life things instead of the election, but it's really hard.
I agree. Well, you got to be able to, take care of things in your own life while all this
Indeed.
other stuff's going on around you. So,
Yeah, getting settled into married life, and now finally I'm catching up on stuff, and so it's like all the things that had to kind of be set on the back burner to get
Mhm.
through the wedding, and I'm getting to those things, and I'm really emotionally caught up. So now it's like, okay, what's the next steps for what I need to do? So
cool, man.
a lot of that.
Just in time for the election. You're
Indeed.
much like Steve Bannon. He just got out of prison yesterday, just in time. So you got to get things done just in time for the election. It was funny. He got some questions at his presser, and they were like, "How did it work that you got out a week before election?" He's like, "I don't know. You look at my sentencing. I got sentenced X amount of time, and I got out at this point. Who knows if there's something phooey with him actually getting out a week
Yeah.
beforehand? But I'm glad he's out. He was, wrongfully prosecuted to begin with. Whether you like him or not, or Trump or anything like that, the idea that we're going to now start prosecuting political operatives, like, okay, half of DC then will be in federal prison. I mean, that's if you want to play that game. So I'm glad he's out.
Yeah.
I don't know. He got put in federal prison for a misdemeanor, which is unheard of. He talked about that in his press conference. He's like, I was the first person at Danbury Federal Prison in Danbury, Connecticut, with a misdemeanor, and everybody there was like, "How are you here with a misdemeanor?" He's like, "Well, I mean, did you read the WAPO? That'll tell you why I'm here." So I don't know. That's not what we're talking about today, but I'm glad he's out so that he can actually speak freely. It's called freedom of speech for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was Trump that said it, but it's really important if appellate judges are impartial and
Yeah.
fair. It seems like at the end of the day, we do have part of the court system at the federal level and the appeals courts that they're not nonsensical.
Yeah.
They understand common sense. They're trying to be impartial, and that's where you had like some of the stuff related to his criminal cases thrown out when they're like, "Why are we doing this right now? You're doing this as a way." This can't happen until after the election, because what you're doing is you're trying to bog someone down in legal battles so that they can't. It's clear that the nation wants them as their candidate. So that's you got to let democracy happen. You can't just try to go after someone with
We'll
the justice
see.
in one state. That's the crazy
Yeah.
thing, is like one state, one district attorney gets to go after someone, and that gets to affect the whole nation. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, sorry.
Yeah, and we'll see if they do let democracy happen or not. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Early
There's-
voting. One thing that's crazy is early voting has been open. It's like 2 weeks before the polls, like literally, or the day of election.
I
So
voted.
never seen that.
I voted last week.
Yeah.
I don't know. Was it this week? What day is it?
Should have been this week.
That
Open
was
Monday.
Yeah, I voted Monday.
Yeah.
feels
A
like
lot of
2
people
weeks.
are. Apparently, they've had like record numbers of
There's
early
major
voting
turnout. I think a lot of people questioned the outcome, as we all know. It was highly questioned last time by many people. And I'm kind of in the middle of that thinking. Like, for people to say there's no election fraud at all, well, that's horseshit. I mean, come on.
There is some.
Pardon my
There's always
French,
some.
but
Yeah.
there's always some. And so who knows how much there was. The bigger issue really with all of that and in general is media messaging, controlling narratives, bearing information they don't want you to know that could potentially sway voters' opinion, which obviously happened. You had all these hearings, the Twitter hearings, the Facebook hearings, the Google hearings, right? So now it's pretty common knowledge that these companies, they're private, they can do whatever they want, but that, they essentially have monopolies on certain sectors of discourse, and they choose to vote a certain way, and that has informed their past decisions, which in turn could inform voter opinion. So those are concerns that everyone should have if you care anything about fair elections.
Yeah. No doubt.
I mean, that's
Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, I feel like the past 2 years, there's been so much disclosure about all types of stuff, whether it's
lots of disclosure.
UFOs,
Yeah.
celebrities getting in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
information about different criminal organizations coming
Yeah.
out. It's just been ripe with. I mean, the last 2 years of the Biden presidency has just been ripe with really cool information and stuff coming out. Like the
Yeah.
public is getting informed because you said it. You had the Facebook hearings, the Twitter files. I mean, UFOs,
Mhm.
Diddy. I mean, just those four alone is the public's getting woken up a little bit.
Yeah,
I
a little
feel
bit.
like.
Yeah, it
So-
feels like what used to be conspiracy theories are becoming more generally accepted discourse. Whereas in the
Right.
past, if you had any one of these thoughts about something, you would be cornered and they'd put a tinfoil hat on your head. Now it's like, oh no, we could talk about that. Let's talk about UFOs. Yeah, sure. Why don't you want to talk about Epstein? So people are a little bit more like open to those conversations, unless they're just part of the brainwash class, which there are those people that'll just think the way they think forever because they're drinking a Kool-Aid that somebody gave them. But I think that's becoming fewer by the day. I think, for the most part, folks are becoming more educated on all possible outcomes.
See,
So-
but in my mind, thinking like a propagandist, this maybe is my tinfoil hat, because conspiracy theories are now starting to become mainstream. Anybody who's running propaganda needs to be in that space
Yeah.
because that's where people are going for
And
their
they are.
information.
Yeah.
So that's the perfect
Well, you take
way.
the UF
instead of
topic.
hiding it,
Yeah.
we just infiltrate the exposure,
Yep.
the disclosure, or the whole
The-
realm.
The perfect place for that, exactly what you're talking about, is like the UFO space, right? Like the UFO chatter and discussions have been going on now online for 30, 25 years, since the mid to late 90s. That's when the internet took over. Suddenly you had these websites that were like Area 51 exposed, and people with all kinds of pictures and information and documents started putting them online. And the internet really made it possible. And now that that's grown into such a huge sector of discourse, you do have kind of what you're saying, operatives that have gotten in. And even in the UFO community, certain people that speak out with an authoritative stance of name, UFO community members will often say, now, is that person legit, or are they part of the disinformation campaign from the Pentagon? Do we know who to
Right.
trust?
The
So-
trouble is they're all for anybody who's not what do you call it? An amateur is a government employee.
Right.
So, or has been at some point. That's
They
why
were-
they saw the ships.
They were at one
supposedly.
point on the inside. That's like the Eminent
Right.
book. Lee,
It's just a reasonable doubt on all of them.
Yeah. Well, Elizondo's book, it's a great book. We talked about it a little bit, Eminent, right? But the thing about that book that kind of caught me a little off, I don't know, put me off a little bit, was when he goes into the remote viewing stuff. And it's kind of like, did you have to put that in the book? Because people that are coming to this with an open mind read this chapter with a bunch of witchcraft in it, and they're like, I don't know if I trust this guy. This is pseudoscience. And so that chapter about remote viewing, to somebody like me,
If you're gonna drink the Kool-Aid, you got to drink the whole cup.
right? But I mean, to somebody like me who knows for a fact that was a real program and that this is real and that psychic abilities are real and things like that.
Right. So he's right up your alley.
For me, it's
we're not
great.
blinking.
Yeah, for me, it's great. But for people new to the topic who are trying to take this guy seriously as the head of ATIP, the Pentagon's
It's the fine
program,
suit, right?
it kind of it's like, could we maybe leave that chapter out so that those people who are more hard science skeptics can just take the rest of this without that?
So that's where I feel like, I kind of have doubts about Lizondo. Not to say information he's providing is not
oh,
correct.
really?
I feel
Interesting.
because he came out apparently in his books and said that he left his government work
Yeah.
to go do this. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guy was at least making the case, and I should probably do a deeper fact check. But he was saying he still retains
His clearances,
employment.
yeah.
Well, not just clearance, but there's some employment
Yeah.
going on. And he said he headed up some programs that supposedly he hadn't. But again, that could be not all public information.
he has certainly
blacked out names.
him and Grush both have been chosen to be disclosure pawns, and they are disclosing what they're allowed to disclose. They're not going full Ed Snowden, like, hey, here everything is. So, I could see why you might question their motives a little bit.
There's a difference between someone who's a real person like me
Yeah.
and you, who saw something or collected this information, is telling the story on the behalf of all these witnesses, but it's restricted. So as long as they're restricted, then essentially they're able to only say what the controller. So it's not, you don't have to be a willing mouthpiece, but you're being a mouthpiece essentially.
Mhm.
Omission is a bigger lie than telling a
Yeah.
lie. And so, or these are people who are agents who intentionally are willingly saying whatever their script is.
Yep.
I feel like somewhere in between both. You know,
I think you're right. Now,
Grush strikes me as someone a little bit more from the heart, even though he seems like a more straight-faced guy.
yeah.
And he, is really trying to be professional. It seemed to me like he seemed like a person wanting to get the truth out there, but really not it being able to.
Yep.
Whereas Elizondo, I feel like he might be a little bit of a. He's trying really hard to be liked.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Well, for those of you who saw the headline of this video and it being about nuclear power and wonder why we're talking about UFOs, here's why. Perfect segue here. So
I think we were thinking the
we
same
are.
guy.
So in Lou's book, and obviously if you follow the UFO topic at all, a lot of the activity, majority of UFO activity the last 20, 25 years has been around nuclear sites. And these craft manipulate nuclear systems. They turn systems on, they turn systems off. They are constantly messing with everybody's nukes and nuclear plants. This has happened around the world.
Nuclear subs and ships.
Nuclear subs.
'Cause they can go underwater.
Yeah, so in Lou's book, he talks about how they crafted a plan.
Project Interloper.
Yep.
Project
Interloper.
It was really hard for me to edit a clip around that
Yeah.
one last week. I was just having really troubles with the software. But yeah, in my head, I was like, Project Interloper, underwater operation, get the subs and the fleet out there to try to
attract them,
bait them in.
That's right. So
And
we
I
can
thought
capture
that
good
was
intel.
crazy.
It's brilliant. Now you understand why the powers that be would shut that down. They're like, hell no, we're not going to do that. Effectively set a trap. And that's not necessarily that they wanted to catch one or whatever. They just wanted to attract some craft to nuclear and water, which are their two primary interests. So the idea being, let's send our nuclear fleet, all of it, out into the ocean together, which is kind of crazy. It's like, okay, we're not going to do that. But, let's capture intel. Gives us an opportunity to take pictures, put our sensors, everything's on full alert. So these things like nuclear, they like that we're interested in nuclear. A lot of people say that's why they're here to begin with. The atomic bomb in 45 attracted them to us. They saw that
What was it? If it was an invitation?
An invitation, like our species finally reached a level of advancement maybe, or they saw that maybe we were potentially could blow up their gas station or whatever the Earth is to them. In any case.
Or what if, I feel like people do offer those two alternatives, but what if we reached this point where we understood, and Oppenheimer, I think, does a good job, but nuclear power is almost like touching into the power of God.
Oh, no doubt.
Because you're going into the root building blocks of reality,
molecular,
where there is unlimited energy, and that doesn't make sense under our understanding of physics.
That's right.
So what if
we don't have the book for that?
We're on the path to ascension, but when we hit this mark, this invitation, so-and-so, is they're trying to stop us from getting to
their level
where we're destined to be. Their level,
it's one of
maybe
many,
the level they were never able to obtain.
Yeah,
right.
Whatever the reason, we don't know. The fact is, nuclear. They're here for that. They're interested in that. They're messing with that. So, if all these companies start moving into privatizing nuclear energy because they need more power to run all their AI computers or supercomputers or quantum computers, their data farms, what's going to happen? Now we're going to have nuclear all over the Earth, proliferated, or we're going to have more sightings, we're going to have more encounters, maybe. That's, we'll talk about that more later. But today's topic is about the privatization of nuclear power, right? And sort of the volumes of energy needed being the cause being, we've got to have all this power. Google, all these companies see that we got to have more power to power our farms, to power our AI, So what's our next step? We got to start building our own plants.
Yeah.
So,
and last note I will mention, because when you're talking about, the link of the psychic viewing, remote viewing.
Yeah.
I think where it can connect to UFO and maybe to nuclears, it kind of, maybe these things are remote view. There are the evidence of remote viewing of something somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's controlled by mind, right. If there's not always a body in there operating,
it's an avatar,
or even if there is
piloted.
There's no hand control. So something is going on for those aliens at a psychic
mind
level.
Piloted. Yeah.
So it could be a remote viewing is the way that they get here, and so the project of remote viewing for like the government tied to this program would be, how do we get there?
It's funny because remote viewing, some people are like, "Oh my God, what is it? Psychics?" The whole idea of ESP, it's like that exists. Extrasensory perception. Like sometimes you can feel it in your own. You get a feeling of something,
instinct
and then it
or
happens. The thing
deja vu.
happens, or you dream it, and then it happens. Right? These things are real. We don't necessarily completely understand them, but they're there, and yeah, the CIA uses them to their advantage, as well as other black ops networks. So, what's your take on this nuclear stuff and related to not only the UFO topic, but more parent topic? Just to take a little bit of a step back, one of the reasons nuclear energy did not become like proliferated all over the globe is because as the United States started to give its understanding of nuclear out to other countries, primarily India and Pakistan, they shortly after developed the bomb. And then the U.S. was like, oh my God, this isn't good. Like now everybody's going to know how to make the bomb. And we don't want them to do that because that's dangerous. But we would like everybody to have this, infinite level of energy possibilities with nuclear. So how do you think they're going to be able to pivot in the private sector to nuclear energy with those concerns, related to the possibilities of it being used for ulterior motives? I mean, that's the whole reason it got killed to begin with, and we started going other directions with power. So it's interesting, just as a sidebar before we really get into it, it's interesting to me that all of these like major companies that have been a part and party to the Green New Deal, green energy, solar, wind, even they are admitting like, yeah, that stuff's great, but it doesn't give us near enough power. Like, which everybody's been admitting to that.
And it impacts the environment.
Yeah. It negatively impacts the environment. You got to deforest all this land. Think about the
birds that get killed.
Millions of acres of solar panels you would need to equal one nuclear plant. I mean, it doesn't compute, right?
I think they say like a solar field the size of Texas could roughly power at least like North America or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's about right. So I worked in solar
still,
for a couple of years.
You're covering the ground. You're impacting.
You've got to deforest the planet.
You have a nasty spot of Earth forever.
Yeah, and that in and of itself is going to impact CO2. You take all these trees out. It's going to cause ecosystem issues. So the idea that you're going to try to fix the global warming with renewable energy, not necessarily. Solar, until they advance solar way further. Right now, it's going to take far too much surface to do what they need to do. So that's why we're getting into nuclear again.
Yeah, I think if we learn, I think the big point is there's a big loss when you burn something. There's a big loss. There's a big pollutant when you try to do most forms of creating electricity. There's a big waste happening. Not so much with hydroelectric, although again, what you're doing is you're taking a physical force, turning something, and then generating that current. So there's always energy lost. And so I think the big push is like, how do we create a system that is either breaks that loop where it's almost recyclable 100%.
Hydrogen car.
It pushes itself while it's, you know what I'm saying? There's no reaction. It's a constant action reaction that equal each other so that you get power.
Yeah.
And I think nuclear, gets there, but it's still doing the same thing. I mean, it
just creates far more power.
Right.
Than these other means.
For sure.
As far as solar goes, so, my work in solar, roughly about 2,000 acres of panels will power about 20,000 homes. So you can kind of do the math on that. I mean, it's like you were saying, the size of Texas, that's a lot of solar panels,
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I mean, you're an entire state.
Possibly the biggest state in the U.S.
Yeah.
Besides California.
And that's just to power the U.S. right now. That doesn't take into account all the power we're going to need for AI, for quantum computing, for technology advancements, which those power needs are far exceed where we're at right now.
Well, yeah, which is definitely why I'm excited to get into our topic today. I will say that the main form of nuclear reactor right now is the pressurized water reactors, and it's a type of lightweight nuclear reactor. It constitutes the large majority of the world's nuclear power plants. So it uses the primary coolant, which is water, and it's pumped under high pressure to the reactor core, which is where the uranium is getting shot with energy so that it essentially starts putting off these particles. And then...
Isn't that so amazing?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so cool.
So the heat is released by the energy and the fission of atoms. So then create steam, which then runs a turbine.
Mhm.
So that's like
So
that's
cool.
a very
It's archaic. It still goes back to like old ways of making it with the turbine.
right,
But
right.
yeah.
It's like an engine where it's like we sometimes just think of something running as it just running, but it's what it is this thing results in this, and this converts it, and
Yeah.
this and
Still a
stores it,
human
and
engine.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it's very much like building an engine, and
Yeah.
a really cool engine, I will say.
So
But
obviously,
yeah, get us into the Google partnering with the energy company, the nuclear company.
I mean, so obviously,
I wanna nerd out about
nuclear,
France
it really has the potential to provide, significant energy, right? Way beyond where we're at now. And it has the kind of low greenhouse gas emissions relative to these other things. The concern with all this private control over nuclear, obviously safety and security. Like Chernobyl, that whole disaster really put the brakes on a lot of this nuclear. It sort of became clear, okay, if we don't have people that really understand how to do this, then we can't do it. And so you run into a shortage in labor. Like how many people actually know how to run these systems and, execute these power production plants? And, the good thing is this will create a larger field of jobs, which is good, high paying jobs, but
more jobs for military guys, because I have some buddies that have gone into nuclear stuff
same.
in
Yep.
the Navy or Air Force, and there's not a huge sector for them in the private. They get paid
Mhm.
well, maybe, but so then those guys would definitely have more of a we take military expertise into the civilian corps,
Yes.
and that could be highly beneficial
Yep,
for both
it
us
could.
and them.
I have a friend doing that right now, and same thing. Went to the Navy, going into the Department of Energy. I mean, he's going to have major upside. This is a young man right out of college. Like that guy's going to be set for life. High paying job. While the labor force is declining because of automation,
Right.
he's going to be upward trajectory working on all this DOE stuff, which is brilliant. So we'll talk about a little bit. Big tech getting into nuclear. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all of them are turning to nuclear to fuel the AI boom. I mean, that's really
their data centers.
their data centers and everything else. So, I mean, just a little blurb for you. Like, they've got to have all this power. And the concern was, where are we going to get it? How are we going to make it? And you have to understand the way these companies function now, most of them are buying their power from somebody else. Like it's rare that they have their own power plants. In some cases, they have some localized sites, but normally they're just buying their power out of the pond, just like everybody else does. You have power plants, make energy, put it into the transmission system, into the pond. Think of power like a big lake. And then, you're over here at a Google factory and you say, okay, we want to buy X amount of power from that lake at this price point. Thank you very much. We'll sign that 10-year contract to buy it or whatever the case is. Now they're saying no one is making enough power for us, so we're going to make our own power. Brilliant, right? If they can do it, if they can pull it off, like they're going to cut down their energy costs in the long term. They're going to be able to create more volume. They're going to be able to work directly with regulators and system operators. So it's going to cut out a lot of those middle red tape people. I think it's going to accelerate the process, which is the key for them. They're basically saying like, look, we need this power yesterday. It doesn't exist. What's the fastest way we can get it? And their folks in the room were like, just build our own plant. That's the way to do it. So that's why they're really getting into this. The approach, the old Silicon Valley approach, move fast and break things, right? Now, the catch here is you don't really want to break the nuclear, but that's what they're doing. They're breaking the power model. They're breaking the model of power purchasing, which, it's going to be wild whenever it comes a day when some of the largest power producers on earth are also happen to be the tech companies. What you consider to be now the tech companies, you have to start to think of them as being global big boys. Like these, we're talking about, they are going to be the biggest companies on earth that control everything, the electricity, who knows, maybe they get into water because you got to have a high volume of water for these plants. They may get into that. I mean, they're going to start being the arbiters of commodity. So commodity not only being data and, data storage and cloud and computing power and, AI, but also being water, right?
You got to have water to run the nuclear reactor.
These are going to be, these companies are going to be what your Westinghouse was, what your GE was, they're going to be the companies of the future they're the companies that buy GE. I mean, that's where we're getting. Like, these are going to be mega global conglomerates.
Oh, we have an energy problem? Oh, let's just buy the network.
Yeah, let's go to Meta. Who
One thing that's
owns-
very interesting when it comes to both electricity and any type of power is we think of, it's a misconception we have about electricity. We think of it as individual particles, like I'm buying this many particles of electricity and that's mine.
Yeah.
But when you buy from the network, you might be buying new energy that's being created over there, but they're not sending that energy over to you. They're just giving you what they already have in their local pool, right?
Yep.
And you can buy futures on electricity, which is kind of weird. But electricity and nuclear is measured by a rate. It's not like an amount, right? An amount of energy. It's a rate per hour, right?
Yeah.
And it's because we can't actually measure down to individual particles of energy. It's a field created. Like I watched this video, really good video. Y'all should check it out. And it is the misconception of electricity where we think of it, again, as this flow. But what it is think of like a water hose full of balls. And our thought is if you put another like marble in it, it'll push out a marble in the other end. But what's really happening is all the marbles are running back and kind of forth.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of like friction they do just by doing this that creates the energy field.
Mm-hmm. I was going to talk a little bit about, we're talking about Google and Amazon and, them being the companies, the power companies of the future. The way they're starting with this is they're striking deals with startup companies that are getting into nuclear. So there's one called Kairos Power, one called X Energy. But the thing about it, like Google announcing a deal with nuclear startup Kairos Power, that just means Google's eventually going to own them. Like they're, it's like you're a startup.
Exclusive distribution
Yeah,
deal.
they're going to basically be like, okay, we're going to do the stock split. We're going to buy you out at this rate. Now we're going to own you. Amazon's going to do the same thing with this company, startup X Energy, assuming that their model works. Like if their power model does work, and in a couple of years, it's like, oh, this is going to work.
Isn't that crazy? They don't even have the one of these created yet.
No.
They're saying we're going to do it, but it'll be 5 years.
We're buying presentations.
Okay.
We're buying, it's the old startup world. We're buying a presentation in a room. So the idea here being that small modular reactors, right? So localized power are going to be safer than traditional nuclear plants because they're smaller.
You can move them. Apparently, you could put it on the back of like an 18-wheeler.
Yep. And, the proponents of this technology, they tout it as being cheaper, faster to build, and ideally is going to provide these companies with a source of renewable energy as early as 2030. So we're talking 5 years away. They're saying we'll be up and running, flip the switch. Now, does that mean we're going to have to pause all this AI stuff until we have the power? It's kind of like the cart before the horse. It's what happened with electric cars. It's like federal government's like mandate California, everybody has to have a car by 2035. And everybody's like, hold up. We don't even have the gas stations. Like you cannot make us buy electric cars if we don't even have the power stations to plug them in. And so that's where we're at with AI. It's like AI can only advance so far without the power needed to run it. And so we're in that kind of, catch-22 space right now.
Yeah, imagine living in the country in like the 1920s, 1930s, and you bought a car. You're going to have to buy petrol from the general store and get it ordered and shipped to you and have your own supply of petrol versus let me drive down the gas station and fill up real quick.
That's why only the rich had it to begin with. That's just like the electric cars. Like when they first started, they were real expensive. Only a few people had them. Only those that could afford to put the thing in their garage and pay the bill and all this kind of stuff. It's becoming more ubiquitous, the electric car, but you still have this issue of long distance trips, nowhere to plug it in, where, how are you going to get there? And so we're in a similar issue here with AI. It's like, it's advancing really fast, but at some point it's going to run out of power. And we're just going to have to put a little pause on it until, okay, hey, we need that nuke plant done as fast as you possibly can. So, you hear the old adage, you can have fast, you can have cheap, and you can have good, but you can't have all three.
Right.
So, how are they going to safely do this effectively, good plants, quickly? It's going to cost a lot of money. I mean, good thing is Amazon, Google got deep pockets. So basically they're saying like AI's just caught everybody by surprise. Like this is an interesting little blurb here. They're racing towards nuclear because they're using exponentially more power now due to the upsurge of generative AI, both Microsoft and Google missed their net zero emissions goals for 2024, which they're trying to check that federal box. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And now they're like, AI's caught us by surprise. How are we going to get to this nuclear energy investment towards reducing long-term big tech's emissions? Because right now they're having to get all this power from other places, and eventually there's not going to be enough. I mean, it's like, do you want your lights on in California, or do you want to be able to use generative AI? You know, like you're going to have, at some point, somebody's going to have to make a choice. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is where we don't have to segue yet, but this is where my plan is to segue to the France network, because I think they're, in fact, they're probably the number one model to the world of, at least for the past 75 years, of using a nuclear power grid, doing it differently, and trying to accelerate into it. And it's because, for one, having these huge nuclear plants, there's all these regulations, all this crazy, class 8 cement, right? Which is pretty much, once you put it up, you can't bust it down.
Yeah.
Unless you have like an earth moving bomb or something like that. So there's a lot of regulation involved, and if you build it and it's 1 centimeter off, so it's over with.
It's an expensive mistake.
And so in this smaller space of these micro sites, I think it's just because it hasn't been done much in the U.S. They're probably moving in that way quickly because regulation hasn't caught up to that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Not many people operating in that space enough to have a bunch of regulation. So it's going to be a little bit of a Wild West in the beginning, I bet.
It definitely will. And you also have the regulatory oversight, and so it is a Wild West, but it's within this kind of constraints of, nuclear oversight that is at a global level. There's compliance with international standards. There's all the safety for reactors, the strict regulatory frameworks. So there's only so fast you can move when you've got a room full of paperwork you got to do that's got to go through all the lawyers and the legal reviews. I mean, and the permitting and all. I mean, it's going to take a while. That's why they're saying 2030.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 years of that's paperwork.
A big thing to do with nuclear power is you're not supposed to run them at varying amounts, right? The whole point is to have a base load and to get close to 100% of that energy used as possible. And so with these companies, their data centers are always running 24/7. So they already have a base load, right? And then if you have multiple data centers being powered by, one or two, then it's actually the most efficient use of you're creating local energy. So you're not having to pollute the environment, right? Usually water and radioactive materials are your only waste, but you could end up creating this bigger grid where all these factories, maybe they can't use all their power. So maybe they let their employees charge their cars, right, for free. They sell some electricity back to the community, right? So with this smaller network of grids, you could have a more robust, I feel like, infrastructure versus you have a huge nuclear power plant, and if it goes down, we're messed up.
Yeah.
Or if demand goes down, then it can't adjust. It takes a long time to scale it up and down.
Yep.
And that's where coal plants are efficient, because if everybody turns their air conditioner down a little bit,
well, you just hit on
the factories don't have to produce as much.
You just hit on something. There's a huge nuclear plant, makes all this power. If it goes down, we're messed up. So
makes it hard to rely on nuclear energy.
Bingo. I mean, you think about how these become a bullseye for attacks, like the cyber war that's going to happen on a global level between AI. It's like, whose AI is better? Can my AI beat your AI and the back end hacking of the systems? Can we decode and hack into your encryption to shut off your plant so that your entire western coast gets powered off, and we mess with your banking system for a week, right? So that's essentially where this is all going. I mean, it's funny because Terminator talks about Skynet, right? This whole idea that you have this global, entity corporation of AI technology that takes over. Well, before we even get to Skynet, you're going to have a bunch of them that are against each other. Like,
Oh yeah,
the
AI,
wars are going
wars where they're especially hooked up to things like quantum computers.
Yes, crazy.
They're going to be infinitely creating new strategies to attack, defend, black box, whatever, any type of strategy. And then I could see where it goes to Terminator, where it's not so much that one day the AI said, we must kill all humans. We hate you, for some philosophical reason. It could simply be survival. They went to war against each other, right? They each keep escalating. And so then the war really becomes these two intelligences fighting each other.
Yeah.
And we're just we're just, I guess, the collateral, right?
Mhm.
They're trying to win the war. That's what they were.
This is
programmed
where
to do.
analog power becomes superior. It's like even the the coal
Can outrun
plant.
you.
Yeah, the coal plant, you got to go bomb the coal plant. Like, the old school coal plants. Nowadays, I'm sure they're, interconnected to the cloud and all this kind of nonsense. But back in the day, there was peak human output of analog, and the only way to take that stuff offline was to go blow it up in person, right? Now everything's like computer to computational in the cloud, so we can get all these back end systems and start to tear stuff down. And that's why you have some people holding on to analog technology and cash in a safe and things like that. They're like, well, I still have this real tangible stuff here. Like, I can still go make a little fire pit in my backyard to stay warm, whenever the whole grid goes down. So,
But can you chop down a tree for fuel though?
I
That's
could.
where
Well,
regulation
yes.
gets in the way.
Yeah, exactly. That's when they start. Excuse me, sir. That's an ash tree. You can't. Yeah, that's a cypress.
yeah.
You can't do that. So.
So I guess where my concern too is with this is with nuclear, a big thing is fail safes. Which have you been to the nuclear reactor out in?
No,
Russellville?
I've never been to it.
I went to it on a field trip. When I was
Did
a
you
teenager.
did you get like a tour in there?
We did. We
That's
did.
pretty neat.
And it was pretty cool. It was pretty fun. I don't think I really understood the implications at the time of what I was visiting.
Yeah.
And but fail safes is a big part of nuclear power. The whole point is if power goes down, if someone gets hacked, right? It's supposed to be almost impossible. That's their goal, is to make it as possible.
Redundancy, right?
That if something happens with the reactor, natural disaster even, it should be able to shut down, contain itself, and prevent itself from like full scale being just blown up, right? That's not always possible because obviously there's evolving methods of doing that. But I think with the small scale stuff that we're talking about with Google, Amazon, Microsoft, my concern is they're going to be hooked up to computer networks, right? These data centers, right? So it may have fail safes so that you can't necessarily hack into this nuclear thing, power reactor to tell it to blow up or anything.
Yeah.
But there's totally the, things like EMPs or other types of hacking where if a network goes down and now you have 100 nuclear small reactors sitting around, eventually it's going to power down and then it's going to start decaying, right? And so then you're going to have radioactive material leaking into the environment, but it's going to be like all over every major city, near every major data center is going to have a reactor leak in, after 6 months, right?
It's going to be
having no
interesting
power.
when you have hackers that figure out how to steal it. Power theft. They're like, we're going to get our free
And
power.
it happens in these data centers, right? You can, like, for instance, in the gaming world, especially, a lot of what these gaming companies I think are doing is they're making you pay them to run software that serves their data network. Or maybe it's crypto mining, right? I'm sure with a lot of video games, it's also crypto hustles as well. The software is bogging down your device.
Yeah.
And the game only takes like maybe 25% of
Yeah.
what's
They're
of the
leeching your
processing.
energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they're also making you sit and stay somewhere with your energy. And some of these games are designed so that by playing a game, you're doing a process, right? So you're actually doing something for the network. I was telling you about. We need to have Nick here to talk about that.
Yeah,
with
we should.
Pokemon
Let's
Go
get him in
and
here.
Niantic.
Yeah.
But it's a gamified version of riding the bicycle to generate some power. And,
Yeah. You got to get on the
people-
hamster wheel for 30 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so these server warehouses also will rent out gaming servers, and you're just paying them to run some power on their server,
No, well,
right?
yeah.
And, hackers do that where they just go into a data center and they compromise a couple of stacks, and they just use it for their own computation.
That'll be a job of the future, right? Where it's like, hey, get on your indoor bike for 2 hours, pedal, 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 and now we're going to pay you.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's going to be a job in 20 years, maybe sooner than that. I don't know. It's kind of weird, huh? Blade Runner stuff.
I mean, I'm sure hackers are already using AI. I mean, I know they
Yeah.
use AI coders, right? So surely, some of these coders are smart enough to take this open source stuff and already have malicious tools that are just hacking with AI. They don't even have to really learn how to hack anymore. They
AI
just have to
does
be
it.
Smart enough to program a good AI.
Yeah, they just
to
tell it
hack.
what they want to do. Write the back end, right? Write
Pretty
the
well.
write the Minimax thing where it's like tic tac toe, but we want you to infiltrate this network.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In your
think-
coding stuff, I'm kind of curious, is it, because what I always think about with coding is we start off with the basics, right? And everybody back in like the 60s through 80s, they all kind of knew how to set up systems and networks.
Sure.
And then we entered the second layers and third layers of it where it's bigger networks and data going, but it's all based off the old coding of like Linux and these older processes that actually made computers run.
Yeah. Well, you have the new
then
base
we have the internet,
languages. Yeah.
where, it's all about HTML and Java and creating something with the tools on the very skin layer. And now we're even beyond that, where it's like to build a website or to do something on the internet, it's just an app tool. You don't even know how to code
That's
the internet.
well,
you just press and do all
there.
this, but you had no idea what it took to get there.
So that is the front end, right? The user, the GUI for the user. But there's coding behind all of that someone's done, and I'm still pretty introductory on all this stuff. But the best way I can describe it to you, the way all this kind of interacts, is that you have many different languages that are all being interfaced together to do one thing. So from as simple as a website, you go visit a website. Well, there's like 5+ languages on the back end of that, all interacting with each other, to provide you a safe and secure user experience.
Which is usually HTML, CSS, and Java. Right?
Well, those are the three that you see.
Right.
Those three languages are all about design, really. I mean, the HTML is still kind of the base layer of functionality on gluing it all together, but all these other languages, that are your processing languages.
It's funny when
like
you see a website minus one of
JSON,
them.
right? I mean, there's so many. There's JSON, what used to be Perl, right? There's new versions of that. There's Flask, which is Flask is a language interpreter that's got language underneath it that you're using the Flask shorthand to make all these languages talk to each other. But there's so many languages behind that it's kind of like, the guys who coded at the base level your operating system. You never see that language, right? And you may even know how to code in JavaScript, but there's 5 languages behind JavaScript that you probably never even heard of. So what you're describing is simply the user end. There's this whole back end of tools and languages and JavaScript is one of those that kind of works between both worlds. And JavaScript, you do get into more of the formulaic processing, but as far as back-end development goes, there's a much deeper net of languages, and there's a few key ones that most people use, 2 or 3.
Python.
But those are the super nerds. I mean, Python is one that gets incorporated pretty heavily.
I feel like a lot of researchers, most people I'm talking about really into Python are like, they're like a chemistry student or a chemistry master's program. Like,
Python is one of the most commonly used programming
computation.
languages now, and it is used across pretty much everything. But you have back end to that even, SQL, JSON. There's other stuff like there's a bunch. I mean, and I'm still getting into the introductory level of those. And really the reason for me is so that I have more of an understanding of how things work. It's not because I intend to sit down and be paid to code. And I don't, in the future, so much of hard coding will be done through AI, and it'll, these guys will sit down and be like, hey, give me a code that'll do this. And then they'll take that code, and it's like students writing their term papers now. I mean, they're getting entire outlines from ChatGPT and then going in and changing it and editorializing it. Because you think about what impresses me is like the hardcore coding in the 80s. I mean, those guys were like sitting down and like coding every single keystroke. And obviously that's still happening.
Building systems.
Yeah, building the base systems that everything else can lay on top of. I mean, pretty impressive. So in any case, there's coming a day where AI could outcode any human.
Right.
And it's kind of like AI playing chess, right? There's going to come a day when a human will never be able to beat AI at chess. It's just going to be impossible.
Right. Well, and that's where the reason I was asking those questions and kind of alluding to is like I with nuclear and like space programs, right? It was all stuff that was done 50s, 60s, and then you have legacy programs, and then those starting to kind of get away and not do that thing anymore. So you have a loss of this transmission of knowledge. And so I'm wondering do you think that will happen with things like coding, where we will get so far and we're so far down that chain, plus we've got AI, that we'll forget really even how to build not how to build a computer, but you know what I mean?
I think that
how
will
to rebuild everything from scratch, we probably won't be able to do it.
I think that will still exist in academic circles only. There will be kind of a specialized academic circle of coding where those guys and gals still know the libraries. But no, you're right. Like for the most part, coding in the next 10, years, I was going to say 20, but probably not even that. Probably 10 years from now, most actual coding is not going to be, I mean, humans will be implementing it and making sure it's right and stuff like that, but I think a lot of coding is going to be written by AI. I mean, it just
Right.
is.
I'm seeing that right now in my work with, like, for instance, carpentry, where with cabinets, you can either order the custom pre-built box you can put together for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
or there's the craftsmanship.
Yeah.
They've been doing it
Custom.
for 50 years, maybe it's second generation. They have a knowledge that is, it's even hard to sell if you have it, but when you see it and you understand it, but the gap between that is crazy, right?
It's cool because it's
Super cheap,
democratizing it.
super expensive.
Like you right now could go out and make an app and put it in the App Store.
Yeah.
With a little bit of a creative idea of what you wanted to make. There's all these different tools out there, and you could be like, I want this and this and this, and I need to use this language and this language. And I mean, ChatGPT right now will give you everything you need to do it. You just put it together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
No doubt.
That's why it is cool, because it is democratizing that whole front end. I mean, where anybody can make anything now.
Yeah, I was
To
listening
some
to a
degree.
talk with, like, a former Google CEO. I can't forget his name; it fails me. But that's what he was talking about. Is like the future of warfare and the future of creation of things is that we'll just be able to tell our script builder, build me something that's like TikTok.
That's right. You're the curator.
Pull all the data, because you can go get some of this data. It's publicly available. So pull me some users,
Yep. API.
and we're gonna
Yep.
set it up. Now that's not the same as some of the things that application or software. They might have some proprietary stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, we're gonna see that where there'll be 100 different TikToks,
100%.
or and then the best one might rise to the top.
Yep.
That's gonna be very wild to see.
It is going to be wild. And touching back to the energy thing, I mean, energy production being somewhat democratized because of technology. When you have startups that are like, oh, we're just going to start making nuclear plants. I mean, that's pretty wild. Their ability to do that is, a lot of it has to do with this automated computation, things like that. Because you think about even something like such as an easy example, space, right? Space has become democratized. Space exploration used to only NASA could do that, and JPL and the Russian version of that. That was it. And everybody, the minds on Earth that knew how to do that were all employed by those people, because there were not that many people that knew how to do it, right? There's only 500 rocket scientists.
Right. So at that time, the government goes and gathers up everybody
Yep,
who
they're
knows
like,
how to do it.
Anybody come on in. We're all the rocket scientists here together. Well, now it's like, oh, nope. Now you look at just SpaceX. It's like they got, I don't know how many thousands of employees there.
Probably more rocket scientists than NASA at this point.
I would think so, and that's part of the reason I think NASA just kind of gave up. They're like, wow,
Well, they contract them to do
when I
other
say
stuff.
gave up, I'm talking about commercial space travel. And NASA's still doing
my phone?
tons. Yeah, that's yours. NASA's still doing tons and tons and tons, obviously, but I'm talking about just spaceship rockets, right? They're like, okay, you guys go do that. We'll do this other stuff with interplanetary exploration and deep space JPL stuff and all that, and monitoring of the Earth, which is still very much in NASA's wheelhouse.
We're gonna worry about dimensional portals. Go ahead and keep sending big rockets. Up
Yeah,
in
y'all do
sky.
the rocket stuff. Take the payloads to Mars. Yeah.
Which, man, dude, I feel like we could talk about this stuff for hours, and then, especially with. I think we need to do a follow-up episode on quantum computing, because I know we talked about it. We talked about how they compare to other stuff, but Brian Cox has a episode of Joe Rogan where he is starting to go into how they think these quantum computers are touching the multiverse when they're running these processes, because they're happening in the theoretical domain of quantum space, and that's maybe where the psychic stuff comes from, is when you are tapping into the energy network of the universe, all particles are interrelated, all information is present.
It's questions of consciousness,
past,
right?
Future, present, all the energy is interentangled. And so if you are able to just get on the thread, the quantum thread, and follow it, you would have the access to that information as a remote viewer. Maybe not physically, I'm dreaming into the past, but that information is stored in the very energy particles and fabric of the universe.
That looks at it from a probability and statistical point of view.
Right.
We're going to look at all possible outcomes, and that's where AI has its finger on the pulse, if you will. The reason it can in some ways see the future is because it can see all possible moves at once. You think of the quintillion number of chess moves as an example. If AI knows all of them at the same time, then it's got the full picture of the entire future. right? And just as thinking of the chessboard as, a state, a start state, pieces are set. Future states, all possible outcomes.
Mhm.
So it knows the future in that sense. It knows every possible move you could make, and then every possible move counter to you that it could make, and the infinitesimal amount of moves possible on the chessboard, which is a
Right.
lot. I don't even know. But, apply
Oh,
that
there's
to.
thousands, like 20, I think 20,000 plus
Oh, no.
different moves on chess.
Trillions.
Yeah.
There's trillions. That's what I was saying last week or week before. In tic-tac-toe alone, there's like 256,000 possible moves in tic-tac-toe. You're just putting X and 0 in squares. So chess is like quintillion number of possible moves, right? So if you apply that just chess example to the real world, if AI gets to that point where it can see all possible outcomes, it can in some ways start to predict the future and at least prevent certain things from occurring, right? And it may get to the point where it starts to shut off some of this stuff. It's like, well, we got to,
Yeah.
who knows?
Well, and the interesting thing to me is obviously in terms of like statistics and probability, we're talking about like theoretical on paper, right? But with quantum computing, where I think it bridges the gap that other computing doesn't, is that the particle itself that is required to do the computing, it has information itself about the real world. So it's uniting the particles of the real world that contain the quantum information, or at least the gateway into quantum connectivity,
Yeah.
is an actual real particle connected to other real information. So I agree with what you said. It almost seems more likely that it is able to see the possibilities in a physical sense, not just like, because I feel like old-fashioned computers, they're in this subspace where they're just, it's like writing on paper in a calculator.
Yeah,
but
that's
it's
exactly
not
right.
synced up
It's
to
analog.
reality. It's
Yeah.
not synced up to, the actual,
It's not a predictive model.
right.
Windows 95 is what you just said. It's me with a pad and a pen.
Right.
That's it.
It's like
right.
writing mathematical equations on a board. You can run all the calculations on a giant whiteboard, but when you sync it up with reality and it can run that computation for you, it's to me that's just insane.
It is, and the reason this topic is so vital, at the core of our very existence is energy use, electricity, all that magic, right?
We're quantum entangled.
And so, with the future obviously will be led by power and power production, energy, driven by that, and so it's such a vital topic that has to be explored and read into. I mean, that, there's so much on the table that needs to be understood that even starting to dip your toes into it will at least expose you to the very premise that, these global multinational corporations will again be the power producers. And that's what they were originally. Like Con Edison, came from Edison, Westinghouse, you had the Tesla ties, all those early companies, General Electric, from Edison, like those
Trump's uncle.
Yeah, like those were the big boys of industry, and in some ways they kind of still are, but they're being overtaken by these new multinationals that are the techs, and that are the AIs, or the clouds, or the So it's interesting to see the emergence and takeover of global industry from these tech companies.
Yeah, no doubt, and yeah.
In other words, now, they're called tech companies, but they're not. They're way more than that. We're working way outside of Silicon Valley in 1995, like, or Seattle or whatever. Like, these are not just tech companies. These are global conglomerate
working to the future.
Power companies, right? Controlling all aspects of banking, electricity, commodity, water, food chain, supply chain, everything. They control it all. So that's,
well, I mean, we talked about before the episode things like the biometric stuff and the potential to use the human body to generate electricity, right? The inherent power of if you just calculate all the cells in your body, and if you split those open at the nuclear level, the amount of power and energy that's within your own body. And I think the fact that that's what they're going after, to me, that's actually encouraging and inspiring, because it makes me think of the own potential that human beings have. Probably the most almost infinite, limitless energy, at least potential energy that we have. And if we learn ourselves to tap into that the things that we can accomplish as
Yeah.
individuals. Maybe it's not going to space. Maybe sometimes in your own life it's staying sober, or maybe it's
Yeah.
accomplishing something, or learning, or applying, or
I always go
personal
back
growth.
to that classic of all classics, The Matrix, right? It's like that movie was 1999. And whenever that movie premiered, like most people that loved it just thought it was an awesome movie. They didn't completely understand it, but it raised all these philosophical questions about existence and technology and control but looking at it now
Illusion.
in illusion, looking at it now in retrospect, 25 years, right? That movie came out 25 years ago. You go watch it again, you're like, holy crap. Like these guys knew what was coming because it's directly ties into AI, programmatic systems,
And that robotics are spiritual.
and beyond. I mean, and that all the human beings are plugged into this neural network that are actually powering the program and
With their
living
mind.
and with their mind, living inside another construct that the AI has made for them so that they, will not destroy the AI. I mean, it's wild. And one of the coolest scenes in that movie is when Neo meets the Oracle. And whenever you go back and you see, it's like whenever he first meets Oracle, she gives him a cookie. And you're just like, my God,
Do you
I didn't
wanna
even
accept cookies?
Yes, I didn't even understand what they were doing. It's like the earliest form of the
Oh,
internet
God.
in 1999, and now you see the functionality
Just cramp.
that's something as simple as cookies.
Yeah.
Like our lives exist on the basis of cookies now. Even at the
Yeah.
even at the forward facing level of like, what shirt would you like to buy today? I mean, so I don't know. It's amazing to me that they were able to tap into the future with that movie.
Right. I never understood why he could control the robots if he tapped into his power, but I think that it gets down to, it's like, if we merge with machine, the machine is no longer separate from us. But even still, it's not because of our energy, our ability to manipulate energy. And maybe he gets into a more Matrix gets into a more Buddhistic view of, like, if you tap into your nirvana enlightenment, then you can change.
That's
the world
all a
around you.
metaphor for what's actually happening, though.
Right.
Which is the fact is he's a coder trying to hack the system. I mean, that's basically what that movie's all about, right?
Yeah.
So,
Tried to hack
he's a
the
soft
simulation.
he's a
essentially.
software inside the simulation that's been written by AI. I mean, it's
Or is he human? Right. That's the whole thing. Is like, is
Yeah.
anything you're observing, even any one of them, actual physical human, or are they all,
One of the
these
reasons it's
scripts
so good.
that were designed to operate this way, to believe
within
they're
this
human,
cycle
to wake up.
that keeps occurring over and
Yeah.
over and over and over and over.
That's where Matrix and Blade Runner, they are, I
Yeah.
think, movies at a different level, because you can assume a lot if you want to,
Mhm.
and you'll get something. But
Yeah.
if you stop assuming, then the possibilities become even more spooky and
Yeah,
crazy.
they do.
and theoretical. It's very
Taps
interesting.
into philosophical questions of very existence, the layer of the universe, and humans' place in it.
Methods of observation and perception as well.
Totally.
Because your
Yeah.
perception affects how you view that movie.
Yeah.
And multiple movies. I don't know. It's wild. Most filmmakers aren't, I don't think, that tuned into perception and observation and the possibility of how we all observe the same thing. We get something different. Most filmmakers, I don't think, are tapped into that at all. But the ones that are, it's like they end up creating these stories that are intentionally like a puzzle, that everybody who approaches it, it's like a Rubik's Cube that
Mhm.
always has a different outcome, whoever approaches
Yeah.
it, right? And
Based
then,
on who's got it in their hands, right?
yeah, very well. I know we kind of like went on tangent, but
Good
I did want to talk
tangents.
about France, because I did do quite a bit of research, and I actually was pretty impressed. Usually I'm not impressed by France.
What do
you
the
know.
French have to say?
So they've been essentially the leader of adopting nuclear as a model to sustain their society.
Mhm.
And since the mid 1980s, the largest source of electricity in France has been nuclear power. And in fact, they've had a long relationship with it, because back in the 1890s, Henry Becquerel, I don't want to, that may not be how his name is pronounced, discovered natural radioactivity. And then later you had the famous nuclear scientists Pierre and Marie Curie, right? So France has actually been a large place of development in terms of nuclear understanding and power.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Yeah, Curie is like a hero to that entire field. you know?
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And the first nuclear power plants were installed between like 56 and 1960, and then more in 1962. And it was kind of like a growing and expanding thing, but people were having trouble in the area because of obviously nuclear bomb. We kind of were in the Cold War, this battle with nuclear versus other, forms of energy.
Cold War comes up a lot, doesn't it?
It does. And as a result, in 1973, the oil crisis that surrounded like the Yom Kippur, I mean, the trouble in the Middle East with the state of Israel and the Suez Canal incidents, it convinced France. Prime Minister Mesmer announced what became known as the Mesmer Plan. And so it was a hugely ambitious nuclear power program aimed at generating most of France's electricity from nuclear power. And so it was driven by current events at the time that are like, if war goes out. He famously said, in France, we do not have oil, but we have ideas, right? So they don't have a lot of indigenous energy, such as oil, and they don't have a lot of room for solar and these other things, right? They have very limited in that realm of the world because they've been there forever. People are packed in, corner to corner. So their idea was like, let's use nuclear and let's do it safely. And as of 2016, there's 58 reactors online. Well, I'm sorry, not online. A total of 58 reactors in France, and 20 of them were offline because, again, they went from this, let's adopt it, to they didn't actually have all the demand for it, so they were having to run their power plants more like 60-70% efficiency compared to...
That's a lot of reactors, man. That's,
It is. They're smaller scale ones.
Yeah,
but,
that's a good way to do it, though. Provided that they can do it safely and properly. And, I'm sure that unlike the power needs here, France got ahead of it. They're like, we need to start making all this power. Like you're saying, they're running at 60-70%. At some point, they'll be running at 90%, right? So
right.
It's just pretty good foresight for them to do that, get ahead of the needs.
Yeah, unfortunately, by the end of April 2022, half of all those reactors were offline, and mostly due to aging facilities. A lot of them were built in the 60s, 70s, and then in like the early thousands, they went into review and they said, okay, we'll give them like 10, 15 more years to operate.
It's almost like they built them too early. They got
there's a lot.
Right?
There's a shelf life, especially the rapid advancement during that time. Maybe if we rebuilt some now, that they would be more, what do you call that? Longevity to them. But again, there's a lot of political pressure. You had things like Chernobyl happen, which happened in Ukraine. I didn't realize. I mean, I think I always think of it as happening in Russia, but Chernobyl happened in Ukraine, and that affected all of like Germany and all France. And when I was looking at this, that's why Germany mostly is anti-nuclear, and they have like none. The last one went off like, I want to say like early 2000s, and it's because you had all this pollution. You had radioactivity, radioactive clouds and particles
coming in
there,
on
their farms. So there's a huge like anti-nuclear movement in Germany, and then you have their next door neighbor France, which is like, yeah, we got nuclear reactors everywhere. So they're obviously, I think, tried to put political pressure into France to try to like trim down that.
Yeah.
But obviously, with like the war in Ukraine and Russia, Germany got into an energy crisis.
Well, I remember that was some concern when the war started. People were talking about the Chernobyl site and hoping that it didn't get kind of,
That's why the Nord Stream pipeline is such a big deal, right? The oil going from Russia to Europe is about the only way some of them get their power, except for France. But France is slowly doing the same thing as Germany. And they, of course, President Macron, goofball, he kind of did the whole 2030 announcements where it's like, we're going to have cars, we're going to, shut down our nuclear reactors by 2035. But unfortunately, that also got delayed because, when you've been operating on this power, and again, it's the state of the energy crisis in the world. That's why France originally did this. So sometimes, people kind of edge towards this pro-environment, politically driven attitudes about nuclear energy. And then you get in the hole and you're like, this is why we did this. Like, it's more practical than that.
Well, it also goes back to that concern that, like, a lot of the enrichment methods and technologies used for energy, needed for fuel production can be modified to produce weapons grade materials. And so when a country's like, hey, we need that technology to build some plants, and then they've got their little black ops program in the back room making bombs, it's kind of, that's when it becomes a little bit of a concern. And how do you proliferate this technology in such a way that doesn't also advance, weapons grade materials into the hands of insane people, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And it's not been without incidents. I've got a list of incidents that are pretty wacky we can look at here in a minute. But I will say, what makes this all unique is that obviously France has been a model for this, and it's changed the way that they operate. Standard deviations from the norm, how most other countries handle their energy. And so what's interesting is some of their nuclear power plants, they run at like peak. So they're like full steam, and then that gets their base load. And then to adjust with the ebb and flow of how society's energy consumption works, they then run the others at like 60, 70%
Yeah.
or lower. if they
Well,
need
that's
to.
because we haven't quite gotten to the technological advancement yet to have proliferation of battery storage, which is kind of the next phase of all this renewable energy. They've been heavily pushing towards wind plants, solar plants, but now the next big phase of that's the storage plants. And, how do we store all this power that's not being used off peak so that it can be used during peak? And that, you're going to start to see a lot of these battery plants showing up all over the place to store that unused energy.
Yeah.
And, that's also going to apply to these nuclear facilities. If we can store all that power, run it at peak all the time, store it all up, right, to use it later times, that technology is just about getting to the point where it could be implemented at scale. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts energy demand, cost, all of that. Once there's hopefully more out there. The skeptic in you could say, well, it's great to have all that, but the tech company is just going to buy all that power. And yeah, they probably will buy
Right.
a lot of it.
Yeah, and that
So-
segues into the because I looked at France, I looked at Iceland, I looked at El Salvador. These are all people dabbling with these, alternative energy setups. Like you said with batteries, I mean, your big concern there now, and people are becoming aware of it, is pollution, and not only that, the mining of it in places like Africa.
That's right.
I mean, that's where
It takes a lot of materials
Yeah.
to build those.
and
Yep.
France has colonies in Africa, which is where it gets most of its uranium.
It
So,
offsets that whole idea of green. When you've got to go, well, we shut down the coal plants, but now we've got the lithium mines. I mean, it's like,
right. And you got to dispose of it in the end.
Yeah.
And, France puts theirs in this underground. It's called the Meuse Haute Marne Underground Research Laboratory, Deep Geological Repository, which has also gotten a lot of heat. So they take all their nuclear stuff,
Yeah.
and it's this church up in Meuse, which is like near where the Battle of Verdun, near the
Yeah.
German border. They just take it deep underground and they just store it in giant warehouses.
yeah, let's
and
go
then
bury it down there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of wild on that point. It's a lot of radioactive waste that
Yeah.
maybe it's not now, but like what happens when an earthquake happens or a major geological shift? You're just gonna have these big storehouses of radioactive material just
Yeah.
bubble to the surface, and then infect the atmosphere. And
It's
all that.
interesting that human advancement still returns to primitive,
Let's
means.
just go bury it.
Yeah, it's like, we got to go bury all that. What else?
Bodies come up. If you don't know,
Yeah.
that, bodies eventually come up
Yeah.
if you don't go deep enough. So
Pretty
maybe
funny.
that's their goal. Let's see.
Primitive disposal of
Yeah.
advanced human waste technology.
So, for instance, some unsafe events. 17th of October, 1969, the Saint Laurent Nowen factory location. 50 kilograms of uranium in one of the reactors began to melt, and it was classified as level 4 on the International Nuclear Event Scale. And as of March 2011, it remains the most serious nuclear power incident because it just like leaks into the area, right?
Mhm.
So it like fully infested an area.
Isn't that wild? That's all it takes, 50 kilos. Like that's a lot of uranium, but in terms of something, that's not that much. Like that would fit in this room. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Like that's,
It's wild.
Yeah.
And 25th of July, 1979, in Saclay, you had radioactive fluids escape into drains designed for ordinary waste, seeping into the local watershed. Right. So that's pretty concerning. 22nd of May, 1986, in Normandy, a reprocessing plant at La Hague malfunctioned and exposed a bunch of workers to unsafe level of radiation and forced 5 to be hospitalized. So like people died from that event. And then I think the most tragic one is the 13th of July in 2008 in St. Paul Trois Chateau, the Tricastin nuclear power plant, which was like one of their biggest. There were 75 kilograms of natural uranium in thousands of liters of solution accidentally spilled on the ground and ran off into a nearby river.
yikes.
I mean, you're talking about
yeah.
like that's a lot.
It sounds like
in a
they're,
solution, right? So it's not just like a
Yeah.
chunk of metal.
well, their nuclear proliferation led to quite a number of accidents.
Quite a
So
number
it's
of
like,
accidents.
Yeah, maybe you
So-
can't do it that quickly. You got to have, I mean, there's got to be safe practices in place. to
Yeah, I think
you
that's
know,
where some of that anti-nuclear, it's reasonable, but then it's also mixed in with passion.
it's highly
and
dangerous.
Farmers who've gotten
Yeah.
their land ruined, people who've had family members
They're
die,
playing with
grandmothers
fire,
die.
literally playing with fire, right? That's
Right.
yeah.
Um, but again, and we were touching on like excess energy, and this is where the Bitcoin stuff falls into place. El Salvador is a great example, but they're kind of like wearing it on their shoulder. They have what's called the Volcanode, um, and it's essentially this facility. I was mistaken when I initially was hearing about it. I thought they were literally putting a reactor over the top of an open volcano hole.
Mm.
That's not the case. What they're doing is they're using the lava flow to generate steam, which then turns the turbine, and then that energy is sent directly to this big data plant. Right?
Yeah.
But that data plant is essentially only mining Bitcoin essentially for the nation. And so the citizens there, they get access to this, currency, they get access to the financial tech. It's enabled them to set up more financial infrastructure and give
Mhm.
access to the public than has ever happened before, even with traditional systems. And so it's USD and Bitcoin are like the recognized tenders of
Yeah.
El Salvador. And the cool thing is they don't force people to use it, but they force businesses, if
To take it.
possible, that you have to accept it.
Yeah.
But the big concern is, right, like we're Bitcoin itself, for instance, is already a bigger emitter of carbon emissions than American Airlines. Right?
Wow.
The people just
That
burning
is
gas to get up and down,
crazy.
right? And it's added the equivalent carbon dioxide of 8.9 million additional cars on the road, right? So just
Wow.
Bitcoin mining, as it's accelerated,
That's
everybody across the
Yeah,
world,
that's something else right there.
right? And so it's like, well, look at all this pollution that's happening because of Bitcoin, right? And so there's a lot of concern over the mining of Bitcoin. It's based on hash rate, which is how quickly all these computers can solve mathematical problems to encrypt and de-encrypt this financial information, right? And process other types of
This
data.
brings up the pollution question. Like in my mind, they're working on this the wrong way. And I'm not a scientist, but to me the goal should be how do we come up with technologies to reduce the pollution at the atmospheric level and take it out to turn it into something that's non-pollutant? Because you're never
You usually have to pollute the atmosphere with something else.
that's because they haven't figured out how to do otherwise. My point is like they're coming up with all these cause issues. Let's change let's get away from fossil fuels. Let's take cars off the road. Okay, well, I mean, you still got all these other producers of,
Yeah, where's the brand new tech that can just
gases.
remove it from the
Yeah,
atmosphere?
my point is like you're going to have to forever mine stuff, have fossil fuel to power all these planes at least for the next 100 years. I mean, unless we have a major advancement in aeronautic technology, but why instead of coming up with solar fields and wind farms, why wouldn't we come up with something that can remove the pollutant that this
Right.
other stuff creates? I don't know. It just kind of seems a little phooey. Like fix the effect, don't fix the cause. In other words, there's got to be a way to do that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have places like China where they have zero regulation, or America.
Yeah, those
unfortunately,
places will never get off the fossil fuels.
we're plagued by this corporate spin for positive social causes. Like, for instance, the environmental
Well,
concerns
that's what all this is.
of
The
let's
Green
say
New Deal.
oil or mining, battery, right? So
Green New Deal, lithium mines.
these
I
big
mean, it's
companies,
like,
Microsoft, they'll sponsor legislation to ban, this
Yeah.
stuff for environmental concerns.
yeah.
But what they do is they do that so that they can move all of their operations to Greenland,
Mhm.
Iceland, China, and not catch heat from it because, well, we can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
We can't
It's
offer
all a
you these
money-making
jobs
scheme.
because we're
It's
doing
just-
the right thing. But
It's
like,
all a money-making scheme.
no,
That's what people need to
you're
understand.
tricking the public
Yeah,
so that they're still okay buying your product despite you taking all your money elsewhere.
100%.
Um,
It's like the diamond mines. I mean, it's nefarious means pollutant causing effects of how to produce enough batteries to, I mean, that's a simple one, right? To drive your car that you don't use gas. Where are they getting all that? I mean, come on.
they're the biggest generators of the
and they're all
pollution.
flying around in their jets
Yeah.
and all this stuff while
Sponsoring the
you
little
can't have a car
foundations,
anymore. By 2035, your car has to be electric. I'm like, dude, I don't even go anywhere. Like, I don't produce it.
It's the same thing with like recycling and trash. It's
Yeah.
like we are in a consumer market where everything has a package and a this and a that and all
Yeah.
these plastics. And it's like I got a couple of groceries and my trash can is full of like the
Recyclables,
wrappers
yeah.
and the boxes and the.
That you pick up
It's
every
like
2
I didn't
weeks.
create this junk.
Yeah.
It's not me, the consumer, that created this
Responsible
junk.
for all this.
Now you can say because there's consumer demand, we had to fill your need and create this pollutant product. So
Yeah.
really, it's your fault because you need to consume.
Right.
But it's like you could have gotten this to me in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, maybe.
Yeah. That's the way
So-
the car works. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And you
my
don't-
car is not.
And you don't make the energy for me to drive the other one. Like
Yeah.
I can't, and nor is it cost effective for me to drive that car. I can't get anywhere with it. It's way too expensive.
But we have to feel guilty. I think that's the. end of
Yeah,
the
I
day.
can
It's
go
like,
buy a gasoline powered car to take me anywhere in town for $5,000, and it'd be fine for like 3-4 years with that car, right? Putting gasoline in there. I'm not gonna go spend $50,000 for an electric vehicle that won't even drive more than a few hours away, and I have to recharge it. Not to mention, if I have a home charger, it's gonna make my electric bill go up. I'm not saving any money. It's actually costing me more to drive your mandated technology to make you feel good.
to pay for subsidies.
Yeah, it's
and,
it's
you know,
all
credits,
nonsense.
Tax credits.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. While you fly your private jet to the restaurant to eat during COVID, while I'm stuck in my house because I can't go anywhere. While you're fine dining,
Yeah.
it's oligarchy.
Well, a big
nonsense.
misconception too is that Bitcoin is
Do as I say, not as I
increasing
do.
this carbon emission. So everybody wanting to do this supposedly is increasing the amount. That when I did some further research, I found that was not actually the case. A lot of, especially large scale Bitcoin operations, they're buying the unused energy. It's created a marketplace where all that, the efficiency problem I was talking about with France. It's not that the power is not generated. It's that they're not using it all. And so it just goes into the ether. I mean, because it sits there and you can't store it.
Yeah.
So when these companies are actually buying it, they're essentially saving some of that pollution of you just ran this plant and you just polluted X amount, but you lost 40% of your power. Let me have that power and I'll use it. And so, yes, it is generated, but it's like now this is just saying, oh, they're the ones generating it. When in reality, it was going to be generated anyway. It's just they are accounting for that generation and pollution.
Yeah, not to mention, I'm sure they're getting some major kickbacks and,
Right.
some grants for the projects they're working on, right?
Yeah.
It's like the government's going to dole out all this money to them to do their thing. I mean, that's the way that works. It's the whole, hand to mouth kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it made me think about like how much energy have we wasted over the past 50 years?
oh, there's no telling.
There's no telling.
Yeah, there's no
like,
telling.
and in El Salvador's case, they have 20 active volcanoes, right? And they're already using these as a source of energy.
Mhm.
So when everybody was coming after them about, oh, the pollutant, it's like we're already doing this.
It's like, bro, we didn't make the volcanoes.
We just said we're going to dedicate an amount of it to this to serve us
That's
financially.
it. Yeah, it makes sense.
And there's just a lot of misconceptions on there
Mhm.
around energy and Bitcoin and using natural geothermal energy and pollution. So it's a very charged space,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Well, if you want to make a bucket of money, come up with a battery storage startup and start
Yeah.
getting access to these federal grants, because that's what's coming down the pike here the next 5-10 years. Like
Right.
write a good grant proposal. We're gonna do the battery storage.
Yeah. And like for instance in Iceland, they have the same thing where it's like there's a lot of companies that go there to mine, to produce. There's a huge aluminum smelting industry there and there's a huge Bitcoin industry there. And
Aluminum smelting. That just makes you think of Lord of the Rings, like building the orc
a lot
army.
of toxic fumes,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
But their Bitcoin consumes more power than all the homes in Iceland, right? So it's like it's a thing of concern to
That's
them there
crazy.
because it's saying, if there's this, if mining Bitcoin is profitable, then technically you should be able to like continuously scale yourself,
Yeah.
right? So it's almost an insatiable
It's
demand,
going too fast.
right,
Can't
for
keep
that
up with it.
energy, and so they're concerned about impacting the environment and the limited area on the island. However, despite however much they produce, aluminum smelting requires more energy than that, and is a much higher pollutant.
I was going to tell you a cool kind of measurement for what this generative AI power takes. This is kind of a fun one. So one generative AI query, so you talking to one query to ChatGPT, uses as much electricity as a light bulb that's on for 20 minutes. So that's a pretty good measure of how much power this stuff takes. So me saying like, what restaurants are good for seafood in this town, that's 20 minutes of light bulb right there. Which I think that's really cool. That's like helps you just understand, the amount of power this stuff's going to take.
ChatGPT receives over 10 million daily queries.
That's a lot of light bulbs, a lot of minutes of light
A
bulbs.
lot of light bulbs.
Yeah. I'd be interested to ask ChatGPT. Let me just ask it right now. How much power does it take for me to ask you this question? Let me see how much electric power. Let's see what it says. Quick response. The amount of electricity used to ask me a question can vary based on a few factors, such as your device, internet usage, and energy demands of running AI models in a data center. Here's a rough breakdown. A smartphone uses 2 to 6 watts when browsing. A laptop between 20 to 50 watts. This says it total energy consumption around 0.01 to 0.05 kilowatt hours per question, depending on the processing power.
So, for instance, a 60-watt light bulb used for 20 minutes would consume 20 watt hours. Okay, so if there's 10 million queries a day, you're talking at, 20 million watt hours
At least.
in a day.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know how many. Usually it's calculated in terawatts, so let's.
This says this
How
question
many
likely consumes
tera-
between 100 to 500 watts in the data center.
How much?
It's telling me that it consumes between 100 to 500 watts. Asking it this
One question?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So much power. So how many terawatts is 20 million watt hours?
100 to 500 watts in the data center, depending on the complexity of the response and model use. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's wild, man.
How does that compare? Let me see. I'm going to ask it, how does that
Megawatts.
compare to 1 minute of a light bulb? Let's compare to standard 60 watt. 1 minute of a 60 watt light bulb uses. Oh my, this says asking me a question uses about 10 to 50 times more energy than running a 60 watt bulb for a minute. So there you go.
Say again, what was it?
It says asking me a question uses about 10 to 50 times more energy than running a 60 watt bulb for 1 minute. So there you go. Just like it was saying, on average 20 minutes, up to 50 minutes. It just depends on, each question could be equivalent to 10 to 50 minutes of a light bulb being on. That's crazy. So we're all going to be in a blackout soon. That's
right.
you
I
know?
mean, that's the big concern is how do
Yeah.
we outrun this insatiable appetite? I mean, given ChatGPT to the masses,
they're going to have
kind
to
of a
curb
scary thing.
they're going to have to curb this. There's no way they can keep up with this type of, especially if everybody's using it. Right now, not everybody's using it. Like only kind of the forefront nerds, people having fun on TikTok and Instagram. Younger generations are using it. Old people don't use this. My parents don't use it. I don't think other people I know for a fact other people my age don't use it. Like I'm one, other people I know, right? I'm sure a lot of my generation does, but my point is like not everybody on earth is using it right now. What
Right.
happens when they are?
What doesn't make sense to me is that whatever you're doing on your computer is more energy than your computer just sitting here on. Like that you're paying for it to be on
Yeah.
right now. It's wild to me how we don't, like, who ends up paying for all that energy?
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of the
Obviously-
reasons they're going to have to start to charge for this. Right now
Yeah.
it's free.
I'll pay for the premium.
You can sign up for the premium or whatever,
I
but
probably shouldn't. I did it once for a project.
at some point you're going to have to start paying just to pay for the power that it takes to run this thing.
Yeah, maybe however many prompts you
You
use
get
scales.
like an electric bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, they send you here's your monthly
Your
report.
ChatGPT bill.
Your ChatGPT bill.
You had 5,000 queries this month about
Crazy.
furry. No, I'm kidding.
All right, what else we got? I got about 10 minutes left here. I feel like we're probably
Um,
getting to the end of the road.
Just some. I mean, I could provide some interesting, data points just about these different countries, specifically El Salvador. I always thought it was cool watching the Bitcoin thing.
The volcano thing is really cool.
Yeah, 70% of the population lacked access to, and still some lacks access to financial services, right? And so you could say like, oh, there's this terrible to bring all this, but the thing is the population's already suffering, and the traditional banking system isn't able to get them access.
Yeah,
And
they got to be
so-
able to use it.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
empowerment that happened. They have 2.1 million Salvadorans actively using their government-sponsored wallet, which they just created. So
You're
get-
getting a window into the future here.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it with automation taking over workforce. We talked about this a little bit before we started. Like 10 years from now, when half the jobs out there are being done by AI, provided we have enough power and energy to run all these automated systems, there's going to have to be some form of UBI, universal basic income, just so people can afford to live. Because if there's not any
Right.
jobs for anybody, because everything's becoming automated. Andrew Yang talks about this all the time, and why these candidates of today aren't talking about this more, I don't know, because they should. It's a winner to talk about this. Like the workforce availability of jobs to workforce is going to change drastically over the next 10 years, and El Salvador is giving you a window into the future. They all have banks. They all have a wallet from the government. I mean, that's like, I mean,
Yeah. They get $30 on signing up, and I think yearly they get like an reimbursement, like their tax. It's like their version of a tax
stipend.
return.
Yeah.
It's because their tax money is going towards this operation that then generates currency for their nation.
Yeah.
They then
So they
pay
get a
that
cut.
out,
Everybody gets a cut. Yeah.
And see, to me, that is a more sustainable way to have what universal basic income. If we paid our government to build a facility,
that idea's fine until they decide, like, okay, nobody can have an income over $30,000 a year, and then we all just live in poverty. You know what I'm saying?
or if you make above a certain amount, you don't get the stipend.
Yeah,
It
you don't
goes
get the
towards someone
stipend.
else.
Basically, it's going to eliminate the middle class. I have this conversation with a friend all the time. I'm like, you know where all these policies are going to end up? There won't be a middle class left. There's not going to be one. Either going to be the haves and the have-nots. And, the middle class is going to go away because that government wallet, everybody gets X amount of dollars per year, but you're only allowed a max, and you can't get a job outside of it. So
I don't know. I think you could, because like Alaska does that, right? They get I think they're PFD checks, where because they're a citizen, and I think it's only if they're like
there's only going to be
part
so
of the
much
tribal
money to go
nation.
around, though. is
Your
what I'm saying.
resources are owned by you as a local population,
Mhm.
and so each year, depending on certain factors, they all get paid something, right? So there's a friend of mine who's a UPS driver, makes 6 figures,
Yeah.
but he's still getting paid that.
That's because he
PFD.
still has a UPS job. When it's an automated truck driving around, he doesn't have that job anymore. What I'm
Fair
saying is, when you don't have the job and all you have is the UBI check, you're going to be
Right.
capped. There's only so much money you're going to be allowed to spend, basically.
Yeah, I guess. And of course, if everybody had a basic income, I mean, there's a lot of goods and services that would catch up to like figuring out how to swallow up all of that. So you're kind of like,
It's sort of a different way of living. It is sort of the society of the future because it's inevitable. Automation and all this other stuff is going to replace a lot of the workforce. When we get into the Blade Runner world, you look at that movie. What are half of the jobs? There's like sex workers, people that fix robots. I mean, it's like, a lot of there's some food vendors that kind of run the restaurant where all the
there's
robots
ones that hunt other robots.
Yeah, ones that hunt other robots. I'm just saying, there's not that many jobs in that world. There's some, but not that many.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's now more important than ever that we, I think things like, populations taking taking ownership of their assets and saying, like, our natural resources are ours as a people. And I don't think foreign companies, Microsoft, Chinese companies should be able to, specifically in Arkansas, be able to come in and profit off of the paper and lumber industry, right? Or the farm
Yeah, I don't
industry
either, but it's too late.
without Arkansas getting a cut of that.
I agree.
Even if that just goes towards paying for our roads, our schools, then
My
taxes
UBI
for
check.
citizens can
Yeah.
go down, right? You can handle it multiple ways where, just like Donald Trump's maybe talking about tariffs, you can make the money to make your place great by people wanting to be there to do business, and then your tax money and your income can go towards other things that make your life better. And I just think, with this Bitcoin thing, I think that's a potential. It could get dystopian, but I do think it's just like the resources where you could, at the very minimum, make enough to buy your groceries and pay your rent because you're a citizen here. This is owned by our stuff, and people want to come here to take this resource. So in exchange, you should be basically okay.
But what if
And-
I want to go on a cruise for 2 weeks?
Well, that's you still have a demand for jobs because again,
What if there aren't any jobs?
if your universal basic income, I feel like
I'm saying
is
when
enough
there's
to
no
pay for your
jobs,
rent.
bro.
Okay, well that's I don't
That's
think
what's
a
gonna
problem
happen.
with UBI.
Not
or
right now.
Like, the population based income, whatever. But yeah, that's more of an AI robotics as
It's a
it
future
advances
problem.
and takes away the jobs. So we could still do the union thing where we say no to robots to protect humans' jobs.
No to robots.
But the thing is, it's kind of all artificial anyway, right? We built this artificial system where we
What if you own the
you
robot
need me
that goes
I
and does
create-
the job? So you own a robot. You send your robot into the workforce. It does the work. You get a cut. It makes money for you. In other words, I mean that's a future that maybe will become feasible
Yeah, and the thing
for
is,
those
is,
that can afford to buy one.
maybe again your robot. I don't know, man. You could make again. We could become engineers of that robot how to fine tune it to make it work better.
Better start
to-
learning some coding or
So
something.
your
I don't
robot
know.
is able to make more.
Although
so
it's
then
going to know more coding than you.
you can
so
afford to buy better parts to make it work on. You bought
Yeah.
the physics application for your
We'll
robot.
just be
You
the
can
Jawas.
Be a scientist now.
We'll just be the Jawas. We'll be the scavengers out there collecting parts, and
Yeah.
I'll sell you this. I got this robot arm
Yeah.
to fix yours, and we're like the salvagers
Yeah.
collecting
It's gonna be wild.
the scrappers.
At least, yeah, peeking into the future with stuff like this, one potential problem they've faced is scam operations.
Oh
Like,
yeah, that'll be
hey,
one.
calling up the Salvadorans saying you got that Bitcoin money. Like we got to, there's also
I
price.
think one of them
plummets.
called me the other day, or maybe just
Uh,
while sitting here.
Like for instance, when they adopted all these policies, they essentially bought a bunch of Bitcoin, like they splashed, but then Bitcoin had that huge drop. So essentially, their whole country had just invested in this tech, said it's going to be great, convinced all their citizens it's going to be great, and then it goes boom. But now we're back up to new highs. There's also a big leap from low access to internet to highly advanced tech. So it's sometimes I think this nuclear, the Bitcoin, crypto, all this stuff is its right place, right time. And if you put it in the wrong place before they're ready, it's just going to result in a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, like I don't know, I had a really interesting time looking into these energy networks. I think it's really the way to the future, right? Maybe having more localized power that is not as pollutant and can serve our needs.
You have a little reactor in your backyard.
Yeah, potentially, right? Yeah, I just think it's very interesting, like people's different approaches and the energy industry in general is pretty. I don't know, it's very interesting.
It is. I went and worked in it for a year and a half to kind of learn about it. I encourage that experience. Yeah.
Any final thoughts on? Obviously, we talked about Google.
No, this is all a very exciting topic. New energy to me, yeah, it's the whole idea of electricity's amazing magic that, we figured out how to harness 150 years ago. But the coolest thing about this entire topic to me, or the biggest takeaway in my opinion, is that what we now know as tech companies are going to become the global conglomerates of the world that own everything. So it used to be the GEs of the world, the multinational corporations.
The arms manufacturers.
Yeah, the tech companies are going to own them. So it's only a matter of time before Google buys GE or some other, you know what I'm saying? They're going to
Especially
be
Amazon. They've already been such a
they're already buying everybody. I mean,
yeah. All the groceries, the delivery, all the internet services they do
Yeah.
for governments. Amazon Web Services is like way more than just web services.
Yeah,
Um,
like Amazon, they
their
don't.
defense software.
That started as a company that you could buy books from. So that's pretty amazing.
pretty wild. Pretty wild.
Awesome, man. Good chat.
Yeah, good talk today. Well, I know there's a lot of the election coming up soon. So
Yeah, we'll be
hopefully we'll figure out
live, I
something
think,
to
for
do.
that maybe.
Yeah.
See if we can figure that out.
Hopefully we're not all blackout. We don't lose power next week or anything crazy like that. But yeah, good to be back, man. I'll see you next time.
Right on.
Thanks everybody for watching.
See you
Y'all have a good
later.
one. Peace.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.